immediately going to throw a wrench into the agenda. I will say welcome. Thank you, everybody. I am so impressed with your continued commitment and making sure that we finish strong here. I'm going to bump Greg Claxton to the top of the agenda. Hopefully then he can go catch some of this sunshine. And he is going to bring the data presentation to us. It's really fantastic, the work that he's done. And so I want to make sure this group has time to get eyes on it. So by starting off with it, we'll make sure that we do. So Kenia, if you don't mind to share the screen share to Greg Claxton, and then
all right, I've got it.
Greg. Great. Greg, would you prefer, I'd love the group to be able to jump in with questions, but would you prefer to have them wait till the end or go slide by slide?
I think if it's sort of quick clarifying questions, I think it's fine to jump in.
Okay, great.
All right, so we've met with, over the last 2 weeks, we've met a couple times with a smaller group focusing on sort of working through some of the data issues, and we're making good progress there. There's a slightly fuller slide deck that I think will be sent out after this, but for tonight I was going to highlight progress that we're making on sort of a composite gap analysis, sort of what the need is, and kind of making the case for further action, and then how that connects to the snapshot of the current inventory of affordable units and program performance to try to put together a picture of kind of what the need looks like in 2030 as sort of, again, building that case for action now. So we've talked about kind of the gap analysis before, primarily about a study that EPS did a few years ago where they looked at sort of on the owner and renter side, kind of what is the current gap in terms of the kind of income that households earn versus the rents and kind of market price of homes, and sort of talking about it as a snapshot in time. Since kind of working on that, and I've got an updated view of that, we've also kind of identified two other ways to think about this gap, and they're conceptually distinct, I think. So we're looking at them as things that you sort of add together to get a view of the need. So the second one is kind of housing needs at different income levels to keep up with demand as we grow, like looking at our projections for 2030 in terms of population growth, kind of how to connect that to the different income levels that we're looking at. That's a method that they used in the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint that we've adapted. And then third, looking at homelessness estimates and thinking of that as sort of a hidden group of folks who don't show up in sort of counts or estimates of housing demand right now, but we know that they're out there and they need housing. This was something I sort of thought through in conversations I've been having with one of Dr. Shin's students based on some research that she had shared much earlier in this process. It doesn't incorporate that right now because it's still in development, but I think this kind of conceptually rounds out at least kind of the pieces of the gap that we've been talking about. So just first, here is kind of the updated sort of current data, census data from 2019, snapshot of the current supply gap. So this is just looking at how many households earn what level of income by whether they currently own or rent, and then what's the supply of homes or rental units based on sort of the monthly housing costs that you can sustain at each income level. So the trend here is consistent with earlier versions of this that we've looked at, with the very large deficit among rental households up to 30 and then 30 to 50. It looks like a surplus as you sort of move up the income ladder, but keep in mind, like, all of those units are getting used up by kind of households that earn a lower amount and are then cost burdened. So, it's not like we've got a huge glut of homes at 50 to 60% because you've got a deficit of 15,000 below that. We spent a fair amount of time talking through sort of the ownership gap here because, again, it's something that looks like a surplus. on the up to 30% or 30 to 50%. But really that's reflecting that there's just a high barrier to entry on the ownership side. So you've got sort of this enormous rental need for folks who currently can't cross over. And so it's, just one of the things we're working on is sort of just how to explain that in the document itself. By and large, this ought to be consistent with what we've looked at before, though. The new portion is based on this section from the Austin Blueprint, where they basically look at kind of regional growth patterns and sort of distribute housing units needed in Austin based on the current income ranges, kind of the percentage breakdown within that. So basically, we just sort of took Nashville numbers and plugged them in, literally. And so kind of looking at a regional growth rate of about 16.5%, applying that to the number of units in Davidson County, we get that by 2030, we need about 54,000 new housing units just to keep pace with population growth. And then we broke that down by kind of the income strata. This isn't anything sophisticated. It's just sort of basically saying in the future, we will look basically like we are today. So it's not like a strong like projection of some change there. It's just kind of recognizing that there's going to be a lot of continuity in terms of how many folks we have at different income levels. And so once we've done that, we get to about 18,000 units needed to serve folks earning under 80% of the median household income through 2030. That's just kind of growth needs alone. That's not the current deficit. One thing we also did, just to narrow in on the rental side, is that we looked at the percentage of owners and renters at each of these income levels to get to an owner and renter need. And I'm going to bring that back in a moment. And then the last thing is just, and this is just sort of very, very roughly working through just to get, again, sort of laying into our gap, the need to serve people without homes currently. So Dr. Tackett sent kind of the current customers that social services is able to identify within HMIS. They identify about 4,900 clients, not including coordinated entry, who are unduplicated, like they know that that's individuals that they can count, and then about 1,200 individuals who are enrolled in coordinated entry. That suggests, and again, there's some issues with sort of time frame and how this compares, sort of the data vintage of the other stuff, but to kind of get a working number here, it suggests about 6,000 people without homes recently. Some number of those are children. We haven't been able to sort of take the next step and identify sort of a number of households that you would need to serve this, but just using a very rough guide of one household per two people, you can get to a round number of 3,000 units needed for people and families currently without homes. And so here what we've done is just sort of narrowed in on the rental gap, because that seems like it's been the focus kind of in these meetings, not exclusively, but in thinking about just the pure numbers of the gap and in the data group. So what we've done is laid out the current rental gap, assigned all of the homelessness sort of estimate of need here, and then brought in those growth trends through 2030, and just basically just added them up to get a total need of additional units at each income level. Again, it's a little rough and ready here, but in terms of sort of these distinct sources of need, this seems like it could be workable. So the next thing I want to do is a quick update on the affordable unit inventory. This is something we're combining a bunch of different data sets of sort of affordable or income restricted housing throughout the county, trying to get it all into one consistent database and deduplicating. We've made pretty good progress on the deduplication. Now we're trying to fill in some expiration dates and just sort of continuing to flag some things as needing a closer look as we go. In all, we have about 24,500 units in this inventory. We kind of break down by the number of units at each site. So you see a lot of kind of sites that have 1 or 2 units, but it accounts for a very small number of units total, 610. And then you can see kind of as you get larger buildings, they account for a larger and larger share of the number of units in the inventory right now. Okay, I'm going to shift and this is mostly just a refresher for most of these slides on kind of what we've tried to do to think about a trend for some of the programs that produce or preserve affordable units, ones that haven't changed quickly, and then linger on one for LIHTC, where we've done some updating work. So the Barnes Fund, kind of just looking at rehab projects, LIHTC, just looking at acquisition and preservation. And this, we got some more recent information from LIHTC. So we've kind of pushed this project or pushed the historical trend forward a couple years. So it's a little bit more up to date. Housing choice vouchers, the Barnes Fund for funding of new units, the trend and forecast, pilot supporting LIHTC projects. And then kind of LIHTC, one of the things the data group asked us to do, and this is where there's been a little bit of new work, has been to take another look at the breakdown between 4% and 9% projects. So we went back to 2010 and sort of broke things out between 4% and 9%, like what level of tax credit subsidy you got, each project got. There were some projects through 2017 that received both. We've kind of, since that doesn't seem to be ongoing anymore, we've pulled that out and put it to the side. And then we've looked at the 4% trend. Recently, it's been producing about 425 units a year. Then the 9% trend, which is lower. Apparently, kind of the state policy is sort of nudges that towards rural areas, but that's been producing about 81 units a year. The data group spent a fair amount of time talking through these projections and sort of thinking through some guidance we'd received from THDA about how to think of you can see it on here, kind of the last couple of years, a big jump in 4% projects. THDA was concerned that was sort of an unsustainable level for Nashville and for THDA to support in Nashville. The data group kind of landed on actually bumping that up a little bit and expecting 650 units per year through 4%. So what we've done is try to put together a composite forecast based on those trend lines, plus the inventory of current units and how those expire over the next 10 years. So I'm going to start on the bottom of these bar charts and work my way up. So we've identified, some universe of about 5,700 units that are associated with MDHA. Our expectation is those are fixed. We don't attach an expiration date to those. You've got some amount of housing choice vouchers. We started with a little over 7,000, and just assuming that there's going to be some continued transition into those, we add about 40 units a year, which has been the trend for the last 5 years or so. The light orange bars are the current stock that are in our inventory of affordable units as they decline based on expirations. So this is just assuming that anything that expires goes into the private market. And what we see is kind of about 18,800 units in 2020, declining to about 16,600 by 2030. So loss of a little over 2,000 units in that time.
Greg, is that both LIHTC and Section 8 properties?
It is everything that we have found an expiration date for. So it LIHTC, Section 8, some insurance subsidy programs. It's a whole mix of stuff. But yeah.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, and Greg, one thing I may want to say is I think the risk of losing like project-based Section 8 in this day and age is relatively very low if we want to relook at that or not.
Okay. In terms of the expiring units, or in terms of that as a source for increased vouchers?
Yeah, I'm sorry. In terms of like the expiration of the contracts and that being flipped to market. I think that's a low likelihood.
Well, let's follow up on that separately, because I think that's probably going to wind up being a very nuanced discussion that I want to make sure we get right. So, okay, and then starting with the next three bars, the dark orange, the light green, the dark green. This is basically.
Greg, can I pause? Sorry,
Absolutely.
I see Dwayne has his hand up in case
sure.
it was on this discussion of operations. Dwayne?
I'd just like to be involved with the discussion about whether or not project-based vouchers are actually in jeopardy. I get what's going on in the market, and I feel like, to be clear, not everybody has a handle on it. So if, Greg, you could include me in that discussion, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. And my expectation is there's a limit to how far we can refine this inventory, in terms of getting it complete and totally worked through before the work of the task force goes out. But we're starting to look at building in sort of support for this and maintenance of this ongoing. So it's something we expect to sort of fold into our ongoing work plan right now.
No, I appreciate that. I just think there's some posturing on several sides, and the facts ultimately don't bear it out.
Okay. So then the top three bars, or the top three portions of each bar, is bringing in the projections that we walked through earlier, sort of how much each of these programs has been producing recently, and then just kind of straight line projecting that out over the next 10 years. So the dark orange are kind of Barnes or LIHTC preservation, averaging about 207 units per year. The light green are new LIHTC 4% projects, averaging about 650, or with our expectation of about 650 units per year. And then new LIHTC 9%, still at about 81 units per year. So to try to summarize sort of the future snapshot, I've got this. It's all the same numbers from that final bar, but to kind of summarize this, we wind up projecting about 40,600 total income restricted units in 2030. That's an increase from 2020 of about 7,800 units. So it is showing progress, but by comparison, looking at the growth trend only, household need below 80% is 13,000. So it's not cutting into the current gap, and it's not keeping up with the trend that we expect, at least based on this work. So that's kind of the update that I have. I'm happy to take any further comments or questions. Otherwise, I think I mentioned at the start, or Hannah mentioned, or maybe you don't know yet, Dia or Hannah will be sending this presentation around along with a few additional slides I didn't go through, so you can sort of review in a longer time frame and give it some thought.
Greg, I just want to hold on this slide just for 1 second, because I think it's a really important one. I want to make sure we're all on the same page of it. Basically, what it's saying is in 2030, we'll have about 40,000 income restricted units across the county, which represents about an 8,000 increase from where we were last year. We know we were short last year, so an $8,000 increase is great, but we expect household growth in those income levels to be at least 13,000. So this actually predicts a widening, even though we have 40,000 units in 2030. We're actually going to have a bigger deficit than we do now, and on the order of about 5,500 units or so. Is that the right? It'll increase across time.
Yes,
that right?
that's right.
Okay.
Any additional questions for Greg? Dr. Shin?
Can you break that down at all by income level? The below 80 segmented down?
Yeah, I mean, we can break it down for the growth trend or the total need, making some obviously very rough assumptions. we don't have the current. I mean, we don't have the current inventory or the trends for unit production broken down by inventory. So we can't match it up that way, unfortunately. That's one of the things that I'm expecting we'll have an opportunity to do once this task force is done, is start building some of those details into the inventory so we have a better sense of that. But right now it's data that we just haven't been able to bring in for anywhere near everything.
Beth, I think we can postulate that the 8,000 unit increase is mostly from the tax credit program, and they won't have associated rental subsidies associated with them, so it'll be more in the 60% range rather than the 30% of AMI range. That would just be based on looking at where we see the growth is. Anything without a rental subsidy is going to have a hard time serving anyone below 30% of AMI.
That was my point. Thank you.
Any, Dwayne, and then Council Lady Suara.
I agree completely. The rental subsidy, particularly project-based rental subsidies provided by MDHA, are crucial to serve the lower end of the income tiers with respect to the units being developed.
Do you, Dr. Shin and Dwayne, feel like there's a recommendation to be made there?
My recommendation would be that that to the extent MDHA has the ability to be flexible with respect to project-based subsidies, that that's part of one of the tools in the toolbox that somebody can use to help with respect to finance other projects, low-income housing tax credits, primarily in tax-exempt bond projects in Nashville.
And I guess I would extend that to housing choice vouchers and to local funds such as Barnes that we need to, since LIHTC will take care of or will at least feed the upper end of the affordable market, that for the things that DHA has or that Barnes has, we need to focus on the lower end.
Well, so we're clear. The LIHTC helps with the construction. It's the project-based subsidy that can serve the lower income tiers with the proper structuring. I absolutely agree that we need it paired with Barnes and other subsidies. But in order to serve the low income tier, you need the project-based rental assistance in order to achieve that.
Yes, I agree with that. And to serve people outside of the LIHTC, you need the housing choice voucher. So it's a both and, it's not an either or.
Well, I agree. But if you're going to do it outside of another project subsidy, I think what you're looking at is tenant-based vouchers, which are really very difficult, if impossible, to underwrite in terms of developing new units.
And Dwayne, I think Dr. Shin said that she wanted to restrict housing choice vouchers or tenant-based vouchers to people at the lower incomes. I don't know if MDHA can set their own specific targeting below the federal limits for those HCVs. Is that right?
They're allowed to have preferences, though I don't get a sense of great willingness to put preferences at the to below 30%.
One thing I'll sort of add to this discussion is, and we had a conversation with Norman the other day, is that the great thing about project-based vouchers is that they can work as an ongoing rental subsidy for the lowest income Nashvillians, and also work on a new low-income housing tax credit development as effectively as a source if they're committed to the project, because it allows lenders to underwrite that revenue into the project, and so it allows deals to go forward that otherwise wouldn't be able to go forward. So I think that's where some of this where these project-based vouchers are distinct. Vouchers in the form of project-based vouchers are distinct from when they are tenant-based or housing choice vouchers. That's an important thing that I think is sometimes overlooked.
Councilmember Suara, did I hear that she had a question?
Her hand is gone.
Thanks.
But
Yeah, I
check.
did, but I'm good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Any other questions for Greg before we release him? Thank you, Greg, so much. This is certainly, as all of us who have been around this work know, this is more progress we've made on the data side, certainly since the Housing Nashville report. And most importantly, I think creates the framework for us to make decisions and then also to continue reporting. Obviously, sometimes that first step is the hardest one to get going. So thank you so much, Greg, to you and Nick, who I know assisted with this work. Thank you. All right, moving into our agenda today. So we've already heard from Greg. I wonder if the timing is probably right just to discuss the working groups. I know I'm just throwing a wrench into our entire agenda, but since Mick referenced the meeting with Norman, Dr. Shin and Mick were both able to join that one. Do either of you want to give a synopsis of sort of what was discussed and what some of the takeaways were, next steps? Mick, I think you're being motioned to.
I was going to let you take the lead, Dr. Shin. So one of the, I'm trying to think of how to, I know that Kay is working on a full breakdown of the meeting. So high level aspects of it. What I took from it is there has been, MDHA has been allocating vouchers to the Homeless Impact Division, and that at least in recent months, the full allotment, which I believe is 18 a month, haven't been able to be utilized by households, or haven't been requested that many. There's about, currently there's about 300 and change formerly homeless households that have housing choice vouchers. Was it about 1,100 total rental subsidized units of people who fit one sort of were previously unhoused, I believe, across the full rental subsidy portfolio that Norman manages, which is more than just the voucher program itself. There was previously some money made available by Metropolitan, the Metropolitan government, for encouraging landlords to participate in the voucher program, but that money is no longer available due to the budget situation. It was in the neighborhood about $100,000 a year, it sounded like, and I don't think it had the impact that one would have hoped that it would have had. It was mostly utilized. It was included like $1,000 bonus for landlords to rent to a housing choice voucher holder, but that was mostly utilized by existing landlords in the program rather than new landlords in the program. And so I think we can also say, hey, that's probably less than ideal. But I think my sense from Norman, if that money was made available and maybe retargeted in a new kind of way, we could expect maybe some different results, and maybe it could be tweak the dials on how it works a little bit to maybe have a greater impact. What I sort of editorially, and I'd be interested, I don't know if you have any conversations since our last conversation, since our conversation with Norman yesterday, Beth, but it seemed to me that there may have been like a systems or a communication breakdown, because or maybe I'm just not misunderstanding the issues at hand, but I was surprised that we weren't able to put in service 18 vouchers for, you know, I don't know what the latest housing count is, homeless count was, but for the many hundreds or thousands of households that are completely unhoused each night here in Nashville. So I was surprised by that, and I think that's a great thing to highlight for further exploration, and maybe there's some sort of improvements to systems that are in place that can help put those vouchers to better use as they currently stand. But I'll stop there, and Dr. Shin, throw it over to you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I too was surprised by that, and haven't had a chance to talk with the Homeless Impact Division about that. And Norman sounded like, you know, he might be willing to have a few more than 18 a month if it was warranted. We also talked about the possible targeting, and HUD requires targeting of, I believe, 75% of new housing choice vouchers have to go to below 30% of area median. And MDHA can set preferences, and there didn't seem to be a lot of willingness to, through preferences, increase that number. Why not? Because he wanted to have all the people who are eligible still served, though of course only about 1 in 4 people who are eligible get served at all now. So I think we could still make a recommendation to increase that number. But he talked about juggling preferences. He didn't talk about the alternative preferences that would be, you know, not filled then. But you did a better job than I would have, Nick. So thank you.
Did a great job. I did follow up with Judy on the from Metro Homeless Impact Division. And the history there is, so just to frame this for everyone, I know that we all have heard a recommendation to allocate more choice vouchers to the Homeless Impact Division. So they have an entire system at work with coordinated entry. And so Norman shared in our small group that the ones they had were not totally utilized. Some of the backstory is they had stopped sending those vouchers for about a year. There was some HUD technicality challenges trying to put them elsewhere. Those started coming back to Homeless Impact Division, I believe, 4 months ago. I'm going to try to chase down when they officially came back, but late fall. And right then we were starting to do rapid rehousing work with a lot of the COVID dollars. And so when I spoke with Judy today, she said, you know, all our efforts as a city, we're going towards the housing work that's being done through there. As of today, we've have 299 individuals that have been housed through rapid rehousing. So with good reason, a lot of energy has gone towards that. And she said, you know, I'm sure there were months where we didn't use our full 18, and some of that, to Nick's point, was systems. You know, there was a briefing that the families had to attend and they missed the briefing, and or, you know, paperwork that had to get done within the right time period. So, you know, I think it's probably good for us to do that data analysis to see the, you know, trend versus, okay, did we have a month where we missed, or is there really demand and to push? And then if not, where is the system falling apart? So is it too onerous for, you know, folks to be able to use the vouchers? What should we do? Certainly on the landlord engagement, there's a larger initiative being put together to do not just incentives for landlords, but the risk mitigation, and to do a rent assurance so that if someone does get evicted or leave, that obviously we're working against evictions, but should they leave the lease, that the rent would be assured. So some of the reasons that we have heard for landlords not wanting to rent to voucher holders, we are trying to mitigate those. So there is some of the larger work that then, you know, maybe that's Metro funding, maybe that's philanthropic dollars. But I certainly think the meeting surfaced some further investigation that's needed. And both parties seemed, you know, willing. I didn't, at least my perception wasn't that there was, you know, Metro Homeless Impact Division is grateful for what MDHA is doing. if we're not using those vouchers, understands that MDHA wants to put them to use somewhere else. So to me, everyone is sort of on the same team. It just sounds like sort of what comes back to the capacity to run these things down and do the investigation.
And Dr. Coleman, I saw you had your hand raised. I don't know if what you were going to ask might have been addressed by comments, but wanted to recognize you if you still had a question.
Yes, I have a question. There seems to be some reluctance for landlords to participate in the program. And have we explored what those reasons are? And then we also, Hannah in her explanation talked about sometimes they're just logistical problems. So if there are 18 vouchers, in many instances, if you want to get 18 respondents, you need 180 people. And I'm just trying to get some sense of how many we recruit to apply or do whatever we need to do to utilize those 18.
Dr. Coleman, I think that in my anecdotal conversation today is exactly what some of what's happened. So there's not, the folks are already in coordinated entry, but obviously with a really vulnerable population, the social workers are sensitive to, saying, well, we'll work with twice as many of you, knowing that half of you are going to, either miss the meeting or the paperwork. So I think what they've done is, worked with the first 18 that qualify. And then if someone, misses a meeting or what have you, then that's probably where we're falling off. So, that is a balance, of course, to say, okay, maybe we should have 1 or 2 extra people in. And if, we use all of them this month, they're automatically rolled right into the next month. So yes, it's a delay, but we make sure that we're fully utilizing them. And then for the landlords, yes, there has been research done, and that's part of what the Metro Homeless Impact Division has done, and they've adopted a policy to how they would do some of these landlord incentives. Mm-hmm. And some of what Norman shared was, correct me if I was wrong on this, Mick or Dr. Shin, but that, some of it was landlords not wanting to, okay, I've got to work with the federal government via MDHA for this incentive, and I already am worried about taking on the voucher. And so some of the value of pulling that incentive program out of government is mm-hmm. to potentially work with, a partner, a name in the community that the landlord might already know. And then there are concerns about damage, who would be responsible for that. And if someone breaks their lease, and then not only trying to mitigate, but also sort of sweeten the pot. So that's where some of the incentive comes.
Thank you.
Of course. Kelsey? And Emily, jump in as well if you want. I know that this is your world as well.
I just wanted to ask if... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Just curious if the small area FMR has been discussed. And then this might be a separate conversation, but my understanding is that rapid rehousing dollars expire. I'm not sure what the timeline is on that, but is there a plan for supporting those individuals once those funds do expire?
Kelsey, you touched on 2 things that I didn't include in my report, and I was thinking about it as people started talking. I was like, oh, I didn't mention the small area FMRs. As I understand it, MDHA has made an application. I don't remember the exact terminology. Emil or Emily or Dr. Coleman may have that at the tip of their tongue, but it'll open up some more flexibility for MDHA on their voucher program, and they'll hear about whether HUD accepted their application in the coming months, and then sometime after that they'll be able to implement the small area FMRs, which seem to have a lot of policy upsides from my perspective, and we may get a wider, instead of the vouchers being concentrated in certain neighborhoods where the rents are starkly lower and having one payment standard for the whole county means that they end up in the sort of maybe in the areas which are able to charge the lowest rents. We'll have a bit more dispersion across the county. So that to me is really exciting, and I'll let other people speak to that further. What Norman suggested was folks that are receiving the rapid rehousing assistance right now begin that process of applying for vouchers sort of immediately to get ahead of when those dollars will be running out, which is, I don't know, I also don't know the exact date, but he encouraged that process to begin immediately.
ML?
Sure, I was going to add that the rapid rehousing dollars will come to an end in 12 months, but there are efforts underway to make sure those folks are work towards getting permanently housed. So there's additional vouchers that Norman is applying for. There's some funding that we have out there for permanent supportive housing, and we're also anticipating some additional funds through HOME, through the American Rescue Act, that will come down that hopefully will help us identify more permanent housing solutions for those rapid rehousing clients.
Yeah, and Amel has been amazing managing all of this money that's coming in. Thank you to Amel. And I echo his comments. The community that is deploying these rapid rehousing funds, all of our nonprofit partners, my understanding, and you can tell me if I'm reading this wrong as well, is they're also trying to sort of, you know, this is a greater rehousing effort than we've been able to do. Some folks might, you know, find they just needed that 12 months of assistance, and then they're able to find employment and not need additional assistance. And some might need permanent supportive housing. You know, we know that there will be a spectrum of needs around there. So our nonprofit partners as well are trying to sort of start to identify what the long-term need is as well. But I agree, in my understanding, they're obviously very committed to keeping these folks housed and, you know, ensuring no one goes back to the street. Okay. Any other questions about the meeting with Norman, vouchers, rapid rehousing work? And I'm happy to share the updates as I get them. I'm included through the Homelessness Planning Council, so I'm able to see those updates, and I think it would be helpful. So I'm happy to just share those. Many of you may already get those updates as well.
Emily, were you going to say something earlier?
I was actually going to bring up the small area fair market rents. The only other thing I would just make sure that we all keep in mind is running the voucher program is unbelievably complicated. I mean, it is truly astoundingly complicated. And, you know, I know at MDHA, like, we are so concerned about our utilization rate and making sure that we are maximizing the money out the door. And, you know, one of the difficult considerations that we've raised today is when you're dealing with homeless populations and those that have like special needs, right, and a lot of instability, it is a tremendous amount of staff work. And we are truly running up against the fact that, like, it's not just the voucher, right? Like, we really are lacking capacity in our community on a larger level to be supporting people to get into stable housing. And so I just want us to keep our eye on that it's not just going to be fixed by us changing prioritization with vouchers. Like, it's certainly a conversation that MDHA is having and like will continue to have, and is very interested in the recommendations of this task force to like be drawing more attention to it and prioritizing where we're focusing. But I just want to point out that like there's a bigger issue at hand that's well beyond MDHA that we all need to be working on to really deploy these effectively. So.
That's really helpful, and I think helpful to understand as well the considerations that you all have from the HUD perspective. You know, as you mentioned, the utilization rate, that with so much uncertainty in our market on where we'll actually be able to put them to work, you know, that's helpful to know as we, like you said, balance these considerations and look at larger things that we can do. I think the landlord incentive is sort of a model that we're seeing, but to Kelsey's point on innovation, what can we do to push ourselves to try things that, you know, maybe haven't been tried, bring things online. So thanks for that. Dr. Coleman?
No, I didn't put my hand down. I'm finished. Thank you.
All right. If there's nothing else about that meeting, the working group with planning, I think about half of this subcommittee was on the planning call, but I don't know if any of you, you all would like to update the rest of the group. The format was with Lucy, the director, Bob, and Greg. And we went around and sort of shared individual concerns. I framed them as mini case studies, but it was really just folks getting a chance to ask really specific questions, and then Lucy being able to be as honest as possible, which I appreciated. I think she was candid in sharing some of the other challenges that the Planning Commission is facing, and I found that to be really helpful. So does anyone want to raise their hand as the recap nominee?
I'll lean forward in recap. I think for one, again, I think it was great to get that type of forum to really have the conversation. I think that allowed us to have much more of a deep dive conversation into particular experiences as well as representative experiences of others. One really big high level overarching theme that I think came from that is, and I think this is important for our entire task force, is that when planning is evaluating a lot of the things that we are considering as a city, and when we talk about housing in particular, their concerns are greater than and have a lot more items to consider than affordability, which is appropriate. I'll be candid and say that, but they mentioned that there's a great amount of considerations around infrastructure that we truly as a city have not addressed, and then also the areas that are quite honestly and prominently being developed and or seeking development already have infrastructure that's been taxed or overtaxed. And there is the plan of Nashville Next, and we touched on that, and it's a great transition point to the topic. But before then, Nashville Next really identified a lot of areas along corridors as opportune for density and housing development, and that really is material for our group to understand, because those are the areas that have the infrastructure that's probably most suited to support the type of housing increase that we're talking about, as well as the greatest ease of access to infrastructure. And that correlates to a lot of efforts that went in place for transit-oriented development that have really yet to manifest themselves. I think the second part of that conversation is Nashville Next as our guiding document for a city, and understanding that that document, the effort, the great amount of effort that went into that document, took place in or prior to 2015. And so, looking at Nashville and where we are now, a lot has changed since then. And really just the understanding that that is meant to be a living document. But yet there seems to be a lot of resistance to, a lot of challenges with, and a lot of capitulation about how much that document is meant to evolve. Again, if it's the starting point of most planning conversations and where we're going to direct our city, it needs to be under constant scrutiny and constant evaluation. And I think an argument can be made that that has not been effectively done, as well as that plan didn't just talk about housing. It was a complete plan for our city's growth. And there's a lot of other factors that need to be considered along with the level of housing deficiency that we have. There are other deficiencies that further complicate the overall problem, and it's making it exacerbated at a certain level. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll offer others to chime in, planning, as we see from the amount of effort and energy we've got from Greg and others on their staff, they want to be a partner, they want to be a player in this, but their hands are tied. And it just really and truly what it is. Their hands are tied in terms of what tools that can be utilized for the benefit of density and the benefit of housing as a result of density. And so there is truly an effort that needs to be undertaken to evaluate how we as a city can recapture control of our destiny when it comes to zoning and density and other types of factors that we can leverage for the creation of units, and ultimately also preserve the units that we have.
Can you clarify, Ed, when you're saying their hands are tied? I just want to make sure that I'm following what
Yeah, absolutely. So we made a push for inclusionary zoning, right? We did that, and that's failed. We've also made some, what I would say, some overtures to create more incentive-based zoning, but a lot of those attempts have just, they've also fallen short and have not been received well, even from just the local populace. I mean, we've had council member Berkeley Allen talk about the bill that she's trying to push through, and it's just we have resistance at the state level for certain things that we try to do, but we also have a great level of resistance in our own backyard. And so between those two rocks and two hard places, we really have a tough time creating units. Can I see your hand? Sorry about that.
Just to add a couple things to what Ed said, it was a really good discussion. And I think one thing Lucy pointed out, or there is someone at planning right now who is really dedicated to going through that zoning code and analyzing what things are not currently working and what can change in there. And I think some of those will go a long way, helping the discussions that are being had in neighborhoods. I think there was also a big emphasis on, we've all talked a lot about neighborhood pushback on projects and affordable housing. And she said, I think a lot of that honestly has stemmed from some of the 1 and 2 family problems that we see around the city, which, when someone actually says that out loud, you can relate to. That's what a lot of the neighbors see, and that's what they equate a lot of these issues to. So I think they're really looking at that and seeing what can we do there. I would say I think that's a pretty hard one to deal with, but I think it's a good one to be looking at. So there were a few things like that. Some of us made some suggestions of other things to look at that may just make it easier for affordable housing, remove some obstacles. Like Ed said, I think they're saying these are the areas that are best suited for it, and what can we do within our urban design overlays and within all these various places that we are studying, because they are, while they're not able to really holistically redo Nashville Next at this moment, they have been doing smaller updates sort of all over town as they can. And when they're doing that, just saying, like, if this is an area where the development should be focused, let's really reevaluate that and understand how that can work and work with the community in that area. They've done some up and down Dickerson Pike. Some of you may or may not have been involved in that. But a pretty good neighborhood process to talk through that, and got really pretty positive results. So again, it's just going back to what we've all said is getting some education out there, and also the ability to relook at where everything is, since it has been so long, in a more holistic way.
And I will say a theme that I've seen, at least as I work with our departments or MDHA, and there's more MDHA connected people here, so please slap my hand if I speak out of turn. But at least what I took away from the meetings that I've had or sat in with all of you on is that there's such a devotion to affordable housing, and sort of hearing from these departments, like, yeah, sort of tell us what we can do, or make the recommendation to help, provide some of that positive peer pressure, whatever it might be, or, give us this direction. I've heard a lot of desire, and, I am hopeful that our recommendations will provide some of that direction, whether it's public property or planning or MDHA, to say, yes, we're really committed to this, and not just this one recommendation, but, we want to use vouchers this way, and we're going to fund landlord incentives, and we're going to do this, messaging and PR to help recruit landlords, and we're really going to go after things in a coordinated fashion. So I think even though there, of course, exist some roadblocks, that the benefit of all the time that you all are putting in is it sort of helps create that momentum.
Yeah, I would also add, I think, just being clear that with that conversation, there didn't seem to be a lot of really any resistance to what the recommendations from our group should be. I think that's kind of what Hannah was alluding to, is that they're welcoming, they're looking forward to what we have to say. More of a personal, I guess, assessment of it is that, we do have a difficult time communicating what all tools we will have available to those who want to develop housing, because there isn't a clear and sustained playbook, right? I think that's the other thing too, is, you know, planning and advocates like us put a lot of effort into creating or finding opportunities we think have some viability to them, and they don't get traction, or they, you know, they fall on the sword for one reason or the other. And so, you know, that kind of goes back to my point, Emily, also, when their hands are tied, is it's not because for lack of effort or trying. There really is some things that have been put into black and white, but then it just can't be used now. And I think the other thing too, we did discuss is, you know, the avenue of how we funnel jobs that we want in our community, right? The way we treat jobs that are, or I should say employers that are bringing jobs. There's a certain reception. There's a certain way the city and other counterparts conduct themselves, but we don't necessarily have that same type of red carpet welcome for 1,000 units that we do for 1,000 jobs. And I think, you know, Hannah's alluded to a lot of that, and I feel like it's very clear it's just not the same. And so if we're a city that values jobs, as we clearly do, as we're growing as our economy, we need to make it clear that we value, you know, units, and units particularly that are affordable and attainable, and then figure out how we roll out the red carpet in the same fashion. Dwayne, I see your hands up.
I just think we should temper our expectations with respect to what we're able to do locally, as given our position in the state. Our state doesn't care about affordable housing. You can view its policies from taxation to zoning, and they don't care. So we have to operate within the confines of the laws that we have now. We can try to push them a little bit, but I think our expectations should be set around what the state laws are currently.
And I think there was a lot of folks saying that as well, Dwayne. I think we agree with you for sure.
Can I chime in for just a second?
Of course.
Thank you. I really appreciate that point that Dwayne is making. I also, though, would love to see from this process an opportunity for us to give language to advocates who can challenge the state. I guess I just wonder, how long are we going to do business as usual? How long are we going to let this is how we've always done it be the way that we continue to do it? So I just want to bring that into the conversation, excuse me, for just a moment.
And Key, I appreciate that. I've been involved with the fight against our state's taxation of affordable housing since '97. And I can tell you that there are a number of very passionate people who have spent enormous sums of money trying to convince the balance of our state that what they're doing to diminish the production of affordable housing in our state has long-term effects. And for the most part, our elected politicians just don't care. So when you say business as usual, what I hear is, I'm going to hit my head up against the same wall that we have found ourselves against. If you got a governor who went in there and decided he was going to carry the water for things like this, there's a chance. But that's not what's happening now, and that's not what's going to happen over the next several years. So, you know, if we all want to just stand up and say, well, this is our voice, well, that's fine. It's not going to produce anything. And that's why I just want us to temper our expectations with, this is what we can do given the confines of the existing state laws.
Can I chime in? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead. And Dr. Coleman, after that, I see your hand as well.
Thank you.
Dwayne, I think what it might, and of course I'm not the attorney on the call, so, you know, who knows if I'm right about this, but I think the thing that I've really been struggling with is, frankly, I think that Metro has had a very conservative legal interpretation of some gray areas in state law. And, you know, for instance, there is no other, under the same kind of state rubric with Home and Dillon rules, there is no other state that has, for instance, precluded voluntary
Can you hold
inclusionary
on for a
zoning.
second, Emily?
Yeah.
Dr. Coleman, can you mute, please?
Oh, sure, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, Emily. I really apologize.
Oh,
about
no,
that.
that's all right. But so, you know, there's no other state out there that's been able to actually ban voluntary inclusionary zoning. And I question the legality of it and our state framework. You know, it's the same thing. I've run up against this where, you know, I've heard affordable housing legal expert or, you know, attorneys, some might be in your office, when who say, you know, our interpretation of the rules against perpetuities and the, you know, what term of affordability we can actually apply is longer than I think what Metro has interpreted. And I also think that I haven't been able to get an answer from anyone on whether or not we could pursue commercial or residential impact fees, which has a very different legal rationale than obviously inclusionary zoning, because it's about mitigating an impact of something. And so I think for me, like, the tough part, to Kia's point, is like, I don't want to just bang our head against the wall around something that we know we're not going to get changed through the state. But I've been really unclear about, like, what are the gray areas that we can actually push on more.
I don't disagree with the points you're making, and I agree with David Kleinfelter as well, that there are ways to push this, but I don't think it changes. It changes a little bit, and I agree with you that it's something that we should probably seriously consider as a recommendation for Metro.
And then Dr. Coleman, I recognize your hand, and then Councilwoman Tuar, I see your hand, and then Gina, I saw your hand.
Okay, I just wanted to say that change doesn't occur when we accept the current reality as the future reality. And I think it's very, very important to understand and appreciate the current realities and all of the things that Dwayne talked about. But we also have to have an eye, and we also have to partner with people around the states and even some from rural areas. And that's what some organizations and particularly know, we've really been working hard to partner with people outside of the 4 major areas, because the legislature is basically from those other places. And there are issues of affordable housing and housing accessibility in the rural areas as well. So we're looking to find a point of commonality in order to move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Councilmember Suar.
Thank you. I like the discussion and I like where it's going. And I look forward to a lot of interpretation that will help us get around the state. But I also want us to be realistic about it as well. So I say let's push it, but let's also know that Metro is very limited. Specifically about the questions on impact fee, we actually did try this last year during the budget season. If you go back and look at some of our meetings, we had a bill on it, but we couldn't do it. Williamson County has impact fee, but Davidson County cannot. It's just where we are. There's so many things that we're limited in what we can do. Some of them will require us to have a charter change at the state level. And requiring a charter change means that the current assembly has to pass it twice, and it has to go through an election during the governor's election time. And so it's not for lack of trying. I don't know about past council, but I can say in the last couple of years, the last council and this one has been trying a lot of things that the state is come back against us. We just passed some rent relief, telling landlords to give 90-day notice and things like that. That is now being preempted. And so it's Metro, the way it's structured right now, is under the states. We're subject to a lot by our current state. I don't know why, but I say all of that to say that it's not for lack of trying, but as one of the people that wants to have a solution I do believe that there are a lot of people out there that can, if we find a way to go around it or an interpretation that would allow us to do it, I'm all for pushing the envelope and see what we can get away with. So, but please know, as one of the people on Metro that is trying, it wasn't for lack of trying on the part of Metro, at least not for the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, council member. Gina, do you want to make comments or ask questions?
I think I was just going to echo what Councilmember Suarez said. I know that it was tried and you know, I think has been tried. I think it was even last year, like we said, where the state would not allow the enabling legislation for Davidson County to issue an impact fee. So, but I do agree with everything everyone's saying. I don't think everyone wants it to stay like that, but at the state, but also know if we're looking for sort of high impact, you know, things to do in the next 1 to 3 years, what are those things that can happen while that's still ongoing? I would hate for us to not do things that the state cannot preclude, you know, while pursuing that. So I think it's just a side-by-side track more than anything.
No,
I agree.
great.
I think it's the both and like Kia was saying though, like give the advocates language. How can we use and capture this knowledge base here and this expertise to make sort of like these specific and critical recommendations, because, you know, we can't expect the average advocate to just know the intricacies of housing, state, metro, history, all of that. So I think I certainly feel a need, like Dwayne saying, what can we do in our current constraints? And we being, in that case, Metro, what can I do to help make sure you all can go build, preserve affordable housing? But I think this raises something that's come up again, which is how can we use these recommendations and the report to help empower our advocates, philanthropists, sort of the other partners that are crucial to this work to say, you know, here's the thing we really need from the state. Here's the thing we really need for our philanthropic asks. So that is where I see both, let's take control of the things we can take control of at Metro, but also, of course, this has to, of course, push the needle and hopefully, you know, when the state landscape changes, you know, we would be ready. Anything else on, we've reviewed our working groups. Any other feedback about the meetings that we've had? I think the hanging chad is around Emily's question with the legal interpretations, and that's certainly something that's a to-do for the way the Metro interprets things. So I have that noted. I would be, while we've got about 20 minutes left, just want to highlight for you the high impact recommendations. So you'll be receiving a survey tomorrow morning. And thankfully your preservation subcommittee did a lot of work on defining high impact. And so I want to share that definition with you now and the process that they talked through to see if we have your all's buy-in on this. So the language we came up with, and this was a lot of discussion on high impact for who and where and when and how. So the criteria that was suggested to keep at the front of your mind, and partly is to act as a check. So you don't just recommend the things that, you know, sort of are dear to you or that you feel most familiar with. But the language being the most impactful opportunities. So a bang for your buck, addresses income levels up to 80% with a depth or breadth. So perhaps it's a tool or recommendation that does a lot for a very specific portion of our population, or something that could be applied across and help multiple income levels, and realistically see significant progress in 1 to 3 years. So again, we talked through a number of different nuances with that language. For example, you know, there might be things that really need to be started in year 1 and year 2. They won't be accomplished, but they really should, you know, we want to see the ball set in motion. And so I'll pause there to see again, and repeat the language. Most impactful opportunities addressing all income levels up to 80%, focused on depth or breadth, and realistically see significant improvement in 1 to 3 years. Okay.
I'm gonna channel Dia that silence is, compliance and agreement. So I know she would appreciate me saying that. So I'm gonna.
Amen.
So.
Amen. Kelsey?
I just wanted to clarify on the point about addressing all income levels up to 80%.
Oh my
Is
gosh.
that just saying that we will
Maybe.
be inclusive of recommendations within that, but not that a recommendation should address the spectrum of 0 to 80?
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. I'll wordsmith it, but basically that our focus is 0 to 80. And the tool wouldn't have to cover everything. I think the framing to keep in mind would be that it would have a strong impact at one income level below 80%, or be something that might have a more shallow impact, but work across the income levels. So the 80% isn't to say it has to help every income level, but that is where our focus is based on the data that we have so far. And we started with, just so you all know, criteria, played around with it a lot, and landed on this as a statement to try to include things that I think really have surfaced as being important, but might not be unit count things. So for example, there's a lot of focus on capacity, Department of Housing, however that evolves. That might not translate exactly into units, but maybe it has a, significant impact. And so we've left some, of course, discretion. That's what you all are here for as our experts, but did want to put a little bit of context around it so that we have some shared language around where we're headed. So, focus on 80% and below, focus on where we can make significant progress in the next 3 years, and defining impact as, breadth or depth or depth. And so you can keep marinating on that, but the second piece to it will be that you'll be able to rank the all of your recommendations, 1, 2, 3, basically, least impactful, medium impact, and most impact. But you will be constrained to a capped amount in each category, so you can't list everything as most impactful. And we again reviewed, should you try to rank all of them, or should you try to just prioritize the top 10%? And landed on this as a way to show a little bit of a scale versus in or out, while also, forcing us into a bit of a position of having to make some choices and prioritization to direct the resources that we currently have. And of course, to remind everyone, this is all the recommendations as they stand will be included in the report. This is not a process of saying what are we, throwing out and what are we totally getting rid of. This is only to say, with our current capacity, sort of where are we going to sharpen for the next 12 months? And then, I think it's safe to assume that we'll add additional capacity that will then, sort of be able to move into that second tier, and this process of, evolving our tools based on the data we have. So this is not getting rid of anyone's recommendations, just trying to build some consensus around what's a priority. Any input there? Awesome. I see a thumbs up from Amel. All right, then that will go. Oh, Kelsey.
I know in our initial conversation about criteria, equitable impact was one of them, and not seeing that explicitly in the statement, not necessarily saying that it has to be, but wanting it to be part of the way that we're evaluating recommendations.
Yes, thank you so much. This is a challenge of trying to import a conversation from the Preservation Committee. And what Angie had discussed there, and of course, this is not a decision that's set in stone, so we'll welcome your input. But she was saying along the conversation of having values that we sort of set out that guide everything we do. They might not necessarily be reflected in the specifics of every recommendation, but the Preservation Committee said we would like equity to be one of our values that we spell out explicitly, at the very beginning of the report. I think there's a couple that have surfaced in our conversations. I think resiliency is also something we've heard, that we would be sort of building a resilient system in our tools. And I think there's probably a couple of others, but to me, these are things that no matter what the tool is, we should sort of have these values at the front of our mind to have as a bit of a checklist to say, okay, we might not be thinking of this. How do we make sure that this is incorporated? But would you, subcommittee, like to add it explicitly into this criteria or keep it as a value?
I think one thing, Hannah, that might be just clear to understand that the value, I mean, those will, a lot of times when you have values, people want to understand how they'll be applied, right? And so I think for what they're assigned to do, I think is there an appreciation and a confidence that that value will be present? I think maybe that's another more pointed way of asking, rather than just saying, do you think it should just remain a value? I think you would get a lot of head nods to yes, but a more pointed question is, do you feel that will be applied thoroughly enough if it's not a key and critical part of how we define our high impact?
That's a great point.
I have my hand.
See Dr. Coleman's hand. Yep. Dr. Coleman.
I would like to see it in both. And that way you don't get to the question of whether it's implied or not. And it goes back from my days of international development where you have to have vertical and horizontal integration of those things that are really, really important.
Okay. I appreciate that. Emily?
I feel like equity keeps taking the place of racial equity, and I know I'm kind of a broken record because I keep bringing this up, but it's happened frequently enough. I'm actually curious to understand if we have an issue as a group in being explicit around racial equity and what we're trying to do.
Go ahead, Kia.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate you bringing that in. I'll just call you my partner in this. I feel the same way. I always feel like I can answer that question. Most people have a challenge with saying racial equity because it's uncomfortable. What I would say is that we don't have shared language about what that means. And so we can put the words wherever we want to put them, but until we get really explicit about the historic harm that has happened, the systemic racism that has happened, and at some point how we plan to address that. Using the words are helpful, but not effective. So I'd encourage us to really take some time to think about what that means and what that looks like for this group.
Dr. Coleman, is your hand raised still from last time, or do you want to chime in again?
No, chiming in. Emily, in answer to your question, yes, in most gatherings of people in this country, there's difficulty in utilization and embracing racial equity, all of the other issues that white supremacy, racism, those are difficult conversations that we don't have often enough. And this is not necessarily the place for those conversations to be overcome, but if we're going to be doing a report and we understand how historically many of the issues that inform and dictate how we approach housing stem from inequality, racism, and those issues that have been systematized and institutionalized, yes, there is difficulty and often reluctance to call it what it is and to deal with it.
Councilmember Swore.
Thanks. I just wanted to chime in, and I said that if we're presenting a report to the city for a solution that is meaningful, I support calling it what it is. it's not balanced. And so if we are afraid to do that, then the work is not complete. And so, yes, I support calling it racial equity. Now, to Kia's point, there's a whole lot of discussion, there's a whole lot of conversation. Yes, that can happen later. But if we as a group are saying we understand there's a core problem that is affecting affordable housing that is not equal, that is slanted one way, and we know that's part of the problem, then I see no reason why we should not say that, and I hope we do. So let's call it racial equity. Let's put it there that we acknowledge it, and that way our solutions will also be focused on that. Thank you.
So I have a again, and this is leaning in. I think we had a conversation as a group, and I've had a lot of meetings, so I might not remember exactly the meeting that we had it in, but really the conversation about how we define high impact. And I feel like, again, Kia just, on my shoulder, but bringing true. We don't have very good shared language, and oftentimes that's because things aren't very well defined. We just assume everyone knows what we mean by values and how we will apply them. I think it may be good for us as a group and counterparts and so on, but to really define those values, like not just list them, but define them. And I think there are multiple ways to define the equity that we're talking about. I think a lot of times people do zoom back out to try to encompass more, but I think racial equity needs to be definitely brought into the picture. I think another one is geographic equity, which again is built off of racial equity, the same with socio and economic equity. And I think we are all saying that we feel that a bedrock is racially driven, but in terms of how we applicably apply things, I think we need to talk about how we want that to be used as a guide. And so I think there is an acknowledgement, and then there's also a utilization piece to how we do things equitably. And I think a definition and further definition around that would be helpful.
I agree. I can get a document started, and I think the values are certainly something that I would want every person's eyes and input on, especially offline, so that people are able to really sit with things and add language that they think is important. Because, of course, like Ed said, that really drives where we go. But, well, it can drive where we go if we are intentional and specific about how those things will be used. Okay, for the sake of time, I really value this. I will send this language out right afterwards, since I don't have it wordsmithed right here, and send it to you all for the thumbs up as a screen criteria. The survey will not be a science completely. It will be an art as well. So I know, we're all going to bring our values and experiences into it, but wanted to just spend some time creating a shared understanding of how we're looking at high impact. And that will go out tomorrow morning, request those back by Monday, and then I'll turn them around to you all so you can see what your subcommittee has prioritized before the in-person session on Wednesday, the 7th. Speaking of, Kelsey and Kia, do you have nominations for that in-person planning session already?
Yeah, I think we oh, go ahead, Kelsey.
Do you want we've received 3, so do you want those names?
Yeah, sure.
So it's Hunter Nelson, Dwayne Barrett, and Dr. Coleman.
Wonderful. If we have those 3, then we can move forward, but I also want to make space in case anyone wanted to self-nominate here on the floor, as it were. Make sure that everyone gets a chance. All right, seeing no hands, those will be your 3 delegates to our in-person session. And as a reminder, that session will not be taking away anything from your work. Your delegates and your co-chairs will be taking all of your work, your prioritization, your themes, the discussion, and trying to sharpen it into a product that we can move forward with. And of course, then it will come back to you. So This is our attempt to have some in-person time in the days of COVID, and so I appreciate you all working with us to have delegates and representatives in a way that feels inclusive for your group, while also meeting our COVID constraints. And then there's the last call to submit any contributions to your sister subcommittee. So we reviewed those last week. If you have anything for preservation, please make sure it's added today, as the survey of those recommendations will be going out tomorrow morning. Anything from our co-chairs or our subcommittee co-chairs before we close out?
Well, I'll just say really quickly, you know, we did start, it's been wonderful to continue to see the amount of involvement and engagement that we've had. This is really where the rubber starts to meet the road. I know we've had people, you know, come in a little late and leave a little early, but we did have every member of our committee in attendance this evening. So again, just wanting to pat ourselves on the back for just continuing to make this push. I know it continues to seem like it's growing and there's a lot of conversations, but we just had another example of how important that conversation is towards what we'll be producing as a team. So thank you all.
I was just going to say that Henry really enjoyed this discussion. So it's just great.
Oh,
thanks,
my
everybody.
gosh. So cute. I have really pushed the pacifier. That's awesome. Oh, and happy birthday to Mick. He had a birthday yesterday, 2 days ago. Sometime in there.
Thanks, Anna.
All right. Well, echoing what Ed said, I'm just so impressed by the dedication and energy you all bring to this. And I can promise you it will not be in vain. We are going to make sure that this acts, you know, as a catalyst for this work. And of course, you know, I won't let you guys go very far. So we'll make sure that you keep us accountable and we keep coming back to you all for good ideas. You'll get the email from me tonight around the language. Please let me know if you have edits to it, and then the survey will go out tomorrow morning. Okay, thank you all so much. Go enjoy your evening. Bye, Henry.
Bye.